We are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's CUI Hotline. You can tell this guy over here is not Jacob. This guy is Matt Brueggemann. I think I said that right. I know I practiced like 12 times before we went live. He is a friend and assessor from the C3PAO Align, A-L-I-G-N. Matt and I have done a lot of content together. He is the guru on assessments. We're talking FedRAMP. We're talking CMMC. Bring all of those questions today. And of course, you know me. My name is Daniel Akeridge. I am the wonderful, fun co-host that will be navigating all of your questions today. Jacob had to take some time off, so we hope he's enjoying that. I hope it was on a golf course somewhere. That'd be nice for him. And yeah, Matt, thanks for joining us, man.
Dude, thank you for having me. I definitely did not kidnap Jacob so that I could get this spot. He is vacationing for sure, golfing. I'm very excited to be here. I'm grateful. Huge fan of the show, as they say. First-time caller, long-time listener. So I'm excited to be here, see what questions we get. And also, anytime, to your point, we've done a lot of content together. You're also obviously awesome and super knowledgeable. Anytime we get together, I am learning something. So I'm excited to be here as well.
Well, let's just jump right into it because the week in review, you've got something for us. I'm actually don't know what it is, except for the 20 characters I see here on my screen I'm about to publish. But the topic is very interesting. So this week, conversation with a former contract officer. What did you talk about? What did they say? Please enlighten us, my good friend.
Yes. So the short answer, we talked about CMMC. The longer answer here. So I guess this is a little bit of a plug of my own show that you can't even go out and see yet because it's not released. But this was a conversation I had on a to-be aired episode of my show, Mostly Compliant, that's going to be coming out soon. So a buddy of mine, Kevin Jans, he is a former contract officer, and now he runs a consulting shop that is, hey, let's help bridge GovCon, the contractors of the world with the buyers of the world, and help people understand a little bit more about the contract officer's perspective on this. So it's a team of entirely former contract officers. So, you know, I've known him for a few years. So I reached out and I was like, hey, man, things are moving here with CMMC. There's some fun language in here about especially like discretion in terms of including CMMC when we think about the phased rollout into DoD's contract requirements. So I was like, hey, I'd love to pick your brain on this from a contract officer's perspective. Like, how do you typically see these things play out? And he had some really, really cool insights. I thought I'd share a few of them that were especially relevant and insightful for me. It doesn't mean to be insightful for other people. Maybe I'm just an idiot, but I'll share them here and maybe it's helpful for somebody else. So the biggest thing that he got out of the way at the beginning is just this clarification, because I see all the time from OSCs or even people in the industry say things like, hey, when we're looking at the rollout of CMMC into DoD's contract requirements, we need to look at the contract officer's discretion. The contract officer's making these decisions. And one of the biggest things that he sort of dispelled right at the beginning is he thinks about it as a triangle of the three deciders he calls them. So there's the buyer, right? The agency or the organization that needs the service. There is the contractor that provides the service. And then there's a contract officer, obviously, that figures out the how, right? Let's bridge these two. So the biggest thing he clarified is like, hey guys, I am told by the person who needs the services what requirements come with it, right? It is not up to me as the contract officer to throw in CMMC. I am not qualified. I am not trained on how to do that. I'm not going to be the one, you know, I'm in this case being contract officer. The contract officer is not going to be the one making the call on, hey, are we going to require level 2 self-attestation in the first 12 months? Is it going to be a C3PAO assessment? And so I thought that was really good to just sort of clear the air, because I hear this term contract officer making the decision all the time. And it's really, you look at the program manager, right? You look at those that are driving the program, those that are going to be procuring the services. They are the ones that dictate to the contract officer, here's what I need in terms of like the actual deliverables, but here's what clauses and requirements are needing to come with that. So that was one of the biggest things. Cool. He also, it's very funny. He has some very fun stories, like about how people will reach out to the contract officers and try to sell to them, which again, it tells you a little bit about how uninformed people are about like the actual process. He's like, I don't have needs. I don't have money. I'm the one who bridges you. Don't come to me with, you know, hey, I can do this service. So a couple other things really quickly that I thought were insightful. Number one, he kind of emphasized, because a big question that comes out a lot is like, hey, estimated 80,000 organizations that are going to need level 2 certification. Only what we have it across the bottom here, 200 and hang on.
We're closing in on 300, I think.
Yeah, probably close to 300 certified clients. That's still not a large ratio. So I don't know, Daniel, if you get this, but oftentimes I'll hear from clients that, want to delay it or push it out, saying things like, well, there's not even enough to do the services, right? Like, how are they going to push this into requirements? And he was very clear. He's like, look, as a contract officer, I need 3 good bids. I need 3 good
Honestly,
bids.
It's less work for them when CMMC is going to be introduced. Who wouldn't love that as a contracting officer, right? It's like, oh, I used to get 15 bids for this. Now I get 3.
It's exactly what he said. He's like, I mean, if you look at incentive wise as well, like, it's less work for us. We're not lowering or dampening the quality of the work at all. These 3 organizations said they can meet the requirements. So he had a lot of really great insights from that perspective on how big of a moat this can create if you take it seriously now between you and your competition. Because if they get the 3, they need the 3. That's all he needs. And he talked about too, like, there's accentuating circumstances where, like, I can get a sole bid as well. I can justify that if and when is needed. So it was really insightful. It was a really great conversation. I honestly didn't know a lot about the contract officer's perspective. So it was really cool to hear him say, like, hey, even when you look at things like discretion of requiring certification or self-attestation, he's like, it's just that. It's discretion. It's human judgment. Like, it's really tough to tell where this is going to land in our laps as a contract officer. He's like, if you did put it on the contract officer, I'm going to err on the side of higher requirements because I don't understand these.
CYA. It's CYA behavior. Everyone does it.
100%.
Like, how can we expect a KO not to do it if it's left up to their discretion? Like, we saw the Army Corps of Engineers, right, publish on SAM.gov and then revise it after the fact. Hey, CMMC is coming in and around October 1st, around that time now. We can kind of get a leaning, at least, that, hey, they're being proactive on it. And they're, at least going to start informing their contracting officers of their requirements. But to your point, KO is not going to make the decision in a vacuum. They don't know what the actual work is.
No, exactly.
Right.
He spoke on that too. He's like, look, if anything, think about this. You're basically making the argument that you're going to convince the DoD in this case, or whichever agency you're procuring from, to not take cybersecurity seriously enough because, there's not enough vendors for this or whatever it is. And like, that's not a fight you're going to be willing to win. And he's like, also think about it, like the CIO, like, there's a purpose behind CMMC. Like, they are going to err on the side of pushing for clients to be at the higher levels because they want to protect this data. That's the whole intent. So I don't know. It was a really interesting perspective that I hadn't heard before.
That's interesting. People just don't realize it's going to be a cluster. The minute 48 CFR gets finally published here in 2-3+ months, like, it's just going to be so many people figuring it out. And there's just the only indication you're going to have is on the solicitation, or maybe the sub-agency or agency will post on SAM.gov saying, hey, this is like a real thing now, right? So, man, there's going to be blood in the streets, to say the least, when it comes to all of that.
Yeah.
So my weekend review, over the past 7 days, I've had 2 companies come to me, and I'm using the fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me.
Fool me 3 times. You're not going to fool me again.
That's right. No more fools. We're out of fools. But I've had 2 companies come to me that went with a different provider for their enclave service, for their support, for their compliance needs, kind of a variety of all 3 of those. And 2 of them came back to me and said, those 2 are useless. They've missed all their deliverables. We're not ready for CMMC. We told our executive leadership we'd be ready by this time. We're months and months behind that date now because of them. And I've had 2 companies come to me and basically realize, like, oh my gosh, like, if I have to like start this over to some regard, right? You guys have to pick everything up and redo certain things.
Yeah.
Like, now my timeline's even longer, right? So it's like, my friend Lawrence says, buy once, cry once when it comes to picking a quality vendor in most cases.
I like that.
And it's one of those things where I'm just seeing it more and more. Companies are knocking on our door saying, we had an MSP. They said we were covered. MSP's trying to get an SRM together or CRM together, right? Customer responsibility matrix. They don't have it yet. I just asked them about FedRAMP services that they're using for us. They don't even know what that is. I'm kind of going down the list, and they're like, we just had a awakening. Oh my gosh, we're going to have to figure out a way to break the contract. If there's termination fees, what that would look like. I mean, you could spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in that. And we've got to basically potentially start from scratch, or at least start with redoing and redeploying certain things and rebaselining and redocumenting and all of those things as well. So this is my sage warning to the listeners here that you guys are already super well aware of. Just make sure that when you are finding a vendor, that you have termination language in case thing goes south, right? Where you don't owe thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And then you're going to have to stay on them pretty tight as part of that as well. So those are the two really big kind of takeaways, or two big companies I talked to this week that had that problem. And yeah, just be careful. So let's get into some questions, if that's okay, Matt. What do you think?
That sounds good. Let's do it, man. I feel like we're at this like fun little place where we're like the calm before the storm, like you said. So I think it's a good time to do what we can to answer some questions.
All right, Nick Olis, can you please clarify the difference between the most hated asset type, and that is contractor risk managed asset, and out of scope? I have a procedure and training that says don't email CUI, post to public website, etc. But it is possible to violate procedure and do so. Does that make it out of scope or CRMA? So I'm gonna take my stab at it just because it's my favorite thing to talk about.
I know you love the vilification of CRMA. Yeah.
And then I'm pivoting over to you. I got to remember which side of the screen you're on here on my computer. So CRMA, the way that it's written is, hey, if you have security policies, procedures, if you can make a case that this asset sitting around CUI assets will not process, store, or transmit CUI, like having a written policy, like you said, that's fantastic. However, this is one of the most discretionary per assessor interpretation asset types there are. Because if the assessor doesn't deem that that's sufficient, and that's kind of in their wheelhouse to deem that, then they can ask to see all 110 controls applied to that asset. As kind of a backup, right? Well, then it might as well be a CUI asset at that point, right? You're not getting the benefit of not having to apply all 110 controls. So the question that you have on is that policy that you have sufficient, and I hate to do it this way, it's going to almost be on a case-by-case basis based on the assessing team that you hire on if they deem that sufficient or not. That's why it's such a, not necessarily, how do I say this? It's not a friendly asset type to people because it's too gray of an area and it's too discretionary based on who you hire to come do your assessment. So that's my take on it. I think you would likely make a case to be good with that, but I'm not the one assessing you, right? Matt's team could say something completely different.
Yeah.
Because it's so fluid and so soft on what would actually be sufficient enough. So Matt, over to you. What do you think about that?
Completely agree. I mean, I think you put it well in a way that wasn't really necessarily going to step on any toes of any particular interpretation, because it is in general. And this is kind of an unfortunate thing right now, but like, look, at the end of the day, individual assessors and individual C3PAOs might have different takes or different philosophies on, several different topics. There are some judgment calls that are still out there. I will say in general, from what I've noticed, the C3PAO community seems to be coming to a consensus on most topics, right? And a pretty strong consensus. But I would agree, CRMA, I would avoid it if you can. It gets really muddy and really gray, and it will come down to a lot more interpretation in terms of proving. And again, you always go back to physical or logical separation, right? So in this case, that's primarily what we would want to see. So when you get into CRMA, it just becomes really gray. Like I'm with you. I've heard you talk about this topic more broadly. Like I just don't love the asset category at all. Like I don't think it's necessary. I think it causes more confusion. And I think you and I chatted about this once as well. If anything, I think it leads to organizations trying to minimize scope in a way that doesn't make any sense, right? Like trying to CRMA an asset that, okay, that's clearly in scope. You're just trying to say, oh, it might not be. And so I hope you won't have to like look at that at the same level of rigor. So I would generally err on the side of avoiding that if possible, because you can fit all the other assets into the other asset categories and have a good sense for yourself. Like, are they within the scope or not?
So Nicholas, good luck, my friend, on your journey of CRMA-ness. It's hard. I mean, you talked about it a second ago. C3PAOs are still trying to get a collective like understanding of what's a good baseline to assess against, right? Yeah. Just a collective like, yes, we all agree on these things, right? these kind of weird nuance cases. Align does a lot of 3PAO FedRAMP assessments. FedRAMP's been around for a while.
Yes.
So that's the nice part about FedRAMP. A lot of those things have kind of been sorted out already.
100%.
CMMC is so new, you know, in the sense of an assessment world, it just gets really murky. And I jokingly say it all the time. You almost have to speed date assessors before you pick an assessor. And there has to be this fine line of like, they're not consulting you, right? So like, but you can ask maybe some questions on, you know, how they might take a certain approach on things or something like that, right? So
yeah,
anyways,
I would completely agree. I definitely get asked those sorts of questions in sort of initial sort of sales conversations as a C3PAO. And look, I appreciate them. Like there's some clients really get into the weeds. They're like, hey, assessment objective, you know, X, what would be your take with this specific situation? And I'm like, okay, there is a line here that I'm trying to suss out of like, I'm not advising you on what to do or not do here. But to your point, you know, we can definitely field questions on like, you know, hey, what is your interpretation? What is your approach here, right? As it pertains to CRMA or whatever it might be. That is a good point though on FedRAMP. Like we've definitely gotten to a point now, there's a little caveat of now there's FedRAMP 20X, which I won't go down that rabbit hole right now unless we get asked about it.
20XX, baby. Yeah.
But for a while, yeah, FedRAMP has kind of, and I would tell people with FedRAMP assessments, again, as a 3PAO, I would say like, look, there's a lot of written rules, there's a lot of controls, a lot of documentation that's required in order to go through a FedRAMP authorization. Unfortunately, there's a lot of, I would call them like unwritten rules as well, which kind of to your point is just things that you learn over time, over years of being in the industry and submitting reports to the FedRAMP PMO and having them push back on certain things or not push back on certain things. And so I think kind of to your larger point there, it is good that we're already, you know, we're at hundreds now. We're almost at 300 certifications. The data points are piling up with CMMC. So I'm hopeful that that consensus will come even sooner than FedRAMP, because FedRAMP has what, like 300 total, right? So there's a lot more data points here with CMMC, which is good.
All right, moving down our list of questions. Jody, has Katie Arrington published a response to the SECDEF's 15-day requirement to give guidance on audit DIB personnel and insider threat programs? None that we have heard. We've been keeping a very close ear to the ground on this. That might have just been an internal response versus obviously an additional memo back responding to it potentially. Yeah, we haven't heard anything on that based on what Katie Arrington, who's the DoD's acting CIO, has responded, if she has at all. So be really interesting to see what comes out of that. What's funny is when we got the memo, I think I'm remembering this correctly, when we publicly saw the memo, not necessarily the date the memo was signed, but when we saw it, I think it was the same day that 48 CFR got pushed over to OMB. And so we saw that memo and we saw 48 CFR all within like a few hours of each other. And we're like, oh my gosh, like this is a direct response, you know, to what's going on here. But there's a larger edit underway, or larger review, underway of all of the insider threat programs outside of just things like CMMC, right? We're looking at FedRAMP. We're looking at all the security standards in the DIB and validating things like, you know, U.S. personnel when it's deemed necessary, right? Things of that nature too. So a lot of this, at least from my interpretation, probably was derived from the Microsoft piece. So that if you guys remember, the Microsoft, you know, was found out supposedly they were using some Chinese people with an escort program that the DoD had previously approved, but no one else really kind of knew about it. And then this article came out. I have a feeling it was the SecDef's response to that. And so now they're going through and vetting everybody, which, hey, I'm be honest, good. You know, we talk about this all the time. FedRAMP doesn't have citizenship requirements or personship requirements. It's a control framework. Yeah. So like, we don't want a FedRAMP equivalent data center in freaking China, right? It's probably a bad idea. So I am happy this due diligence is happening. Jody, we haven't heard on what the response from the CIO has been there. Oh, wow, this one covers us up.
Oh my God.
It's kind of funny to do that, right? Question on conference room scope. We are a small company and only have one conference room. We do have an enclave office with proper physical security protection controls, but it's a true office. If a CUI team needs to use the conference room for discussions using the projector, does the conference room become a CUI asset, or could it be classified as a CRMA? I'm assuming it'd be a CUI asset, but wanted your thoughts. So This is kind of an interesting one. So if you're using a projector, you're obviously displaying something in the room. You're displaying CUI. You probably have, a conference room phone, on the table as well to discuss this, some sort of like VTC type equivalent, right? And so the physical protection, so a few things has to happen. Authorized users only, right? From a personnel and screening perspective. The site itself, because it's in one of your corporate buildings, I think it would be hard to say it's an alternate work site. Although you might be able to squeeze that out. That would be kind of walking a real tight line there. I would probably move towards the world of treating it like a CUI asset with physical protections in place when it comes to that. And it doesn't have to be treated like that all the time. And what I mean by that is you have a policy so that when CUI is discussed about in that room, the room comes under these controls, right? So visitor management, access control, authorization, all of those things are now applied. And then when CUI is not being discussed, obviously the regular rules can be engaged, right? You can talk about whatever you want, maybe no authorization requirement prior, things of that nature. Matt, does that feel pretty good to you?
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, I would agree. I feel like this gets into a very specific example of what we were just talking about before, where it's like, oh, it could be a CRMA, but then we're like, well, why not just do this instead, right? Where it's like, okay, why not denote it as CUI? And then to your point, just have because like, look, if that's the case for the larger, I don't remember if you said headquarters, wherever this is, like you're probably doing badging, you're doing some of those physical environmental security controls there anyway. So like if this conference room would then be in scope, I would agree with you, Daniel, like treat it as if that does have access to CUI and then policies and procedure. This is where we always go back to like documentation on our end. And I think we'll get to this more, but like the more documentation, the better. Like CYA there in terms of we have documentation that talks about how, there are times where we come in there with CUI, and then this is when we employ these procedures that protect it as if it were CUI. And then to your point, Daniel, you don't always have to protect it that way based on the policies and procedures that clearly outline, here's how we know, if and when it is and what we do in those situations.
Now, the only gotcha I could see here, because the trend for several years has been glass conference rooms. Who doesn't love a good fishbowl conference room?
Yeah.
If you have unauthorized people on the other side of the glass that can look in, you might need to throw some frosting on the windows, right? Of some sort. So there are like little nuances like that you might need to add extra consideration for. But to your point, it can be a multi-use space just when CUI is done. Follow the procedure.
Yep.
This one, dark green always coming out of here with the freaking bangers. So GCC Hive VDI, I've got an enclave. The laptop connecting to the VDI is using Teams in the VDI. I've gotten this question quite a few times. Activating the laptop's webcam and mic. Is that laptop a collaborative computing device? And I think there's a follow-on here. Is Teams Zoom a collaborative computing device per NIST? It is in Rev 3. So I don't know if it would be deemed. I would have to do some research, in all honesty there. What I've been concerned about is the laptop becoming a CUI asset versus that other kind of independent, more like VTC type of an asset, right? Because it's just redirecting. Because if you look at the CMMC-L2 scoping guidance, which we'll pull up here in a wonderful little PowerPoint chart that I have, it basically says that the only emulation that can occur is keyboard, mouse, and video. It doesn't say anything about inputs like a mic as part of that as well. And so what I would probably recommend on that front, again, I'll have to research the collaborative device, but I would probably look into clarification from the DoD CIO's office as an exemption or approval, because then you get into, places that you could have to defend that pretty severely. So down here at the bottom, an endpoint hosting a VDI client configured to not allow any processing, storage, or transmission of CUI, which if you're talking CUI into your mic, that would constitute it. The keyboard, video, mouse sent to the VDI client is considered an out-of-scope asset. So I think at best, and I hate using this, you can maybe think CRMA, but if you're using CUI, it kind of brings that physical device into scope as CUI. So what I've seen some people do to hedge their bets is use their cell phone, their BYOD cell phone that's joined to a Gov Cloud, come back and dial into the meeting and see the image on the screen of the teams that's sharing, but using a traditional PTSN instead of redirecting the audio or the microphone from their computer. Does that make sense? So like, I'm going to dial in a conference bridge and listen here so that, again, only authorized people can listen, or in my AirPods. So I don't have to bring my physical device in the sense of my laptop into scope by redirecting the mic. I have not seen any clarity on how people are assessing this when it comes to Teams redirection for usage in the enclave. Matt, have you seen anything like that?
No, this is a really good question. I don't know either. This is one I want to take away. I'd love to. Do you guys send like follow-up answers on or anything like that?
Yeah. So if you get an answer, Darkring's with us almost every week. He's a tried and true. Or she. Darkring, I honestly can't remember who you are. I'm sorry.
No, yeah, I would agree. Like I don't know enough on how we would make that determination on the assessment side. So I'd love to take that away. Yeah.
Yeah. It'd be an interesting email to the CIO's office. I'll see if I can draft that and send it just to see what the DoD thinks versus what a C3PAO thinks. Because again, these are the things. There's so few assessments done that this might not have even been seen, but maybe a handful of times. And it could have been assessed differently for each of those times. So
right, exactly. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. Like we were talking about the data points before, is like there are way more with something like FedRAMP, but to your point, there's so many of these little like niche specific use cases like per control that it's like, yeah, has that happened? If it has it been a handful of times, and has one C3PAO experienced it more than once themselves? Right. So yeah, it's interesting to try to figure all this out.
So one of the things we talked about a lot, you and I personally, but then also on this live stream, is this whole concept of phase one pre-assessment.
Yeah.
So I saw a LinkedIn post you had the other day. One of it said like why a mock assessment is still good, because phase one is not giving you a mock assessment.
Right.
Phase one is you give us your documentation. We validate basically just that you have it and that you have the supporting documents needed to actually do an assessment. But we've also, and Jacob's asked this multiple times, we wish the Cyber AB would not only track failures and passes of CMMC certs, but how many people are in limbo because they can't get through phase one because they don't have all the appropriate documentation. So Matt, to kind of your world of things, assessing people, I felt like for a while we were having a ton of what Jacob deemed false starts, right? Where a lot of people, I had one conversation at CS2 this year.
Yeah.
That they were like, well, I paid for an assessment, the date was coming up. I guess this was one. Yeah, I don't think this was you. This was somebody else. They called the company and said, "Hey, we just scheduling your assessment. You still ready? We need your compliance documentation. We need your SSP. We need these artifacts." They're like, "Oh no, just come on site. Like, just ask our guys the questions, and they'll be able to answer you. No problem." And I remember hearing that at CS2. I'm like, it's amazing that that's still the logic that people think like, "Oh, just show up on site and just ask Joe, Steve, and Darlene, the questions you need, and we'll just get out of the assessment and be done." So talk a little bit more to the issues you're seeing as part of phase one here, if you don't mind.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot here. Excuse me. Still got a little phlegm going on from this week. Man, that's a really interesting use case to hear, because I'm like, if anything, I'm like, you do not want to forego phase one if you don't have to. Phase one is like the opportunity that we have as a C3PAO without crossing our line of independence into consulting or advising. But it's the biggest area that we have to let you know, hey, you're not ready for this assessment, without having to send and upload into EMAS a failed CMMC assessment, right? So first of all, to anybody that's thinking in that vein, I would not try to pass or forego phase one. And part of it gets into what we're talking about here. So a couple things before I get into the specific question. Another thing you touched on there, like the number of false starts and wishing they could publish that. I'll say anecdotally, for us, there have been a pretty large number of false starts, to be frank. We work with organizations at any and every sort of avenue, in terms of, hey, if they come to us and they say they're ready for a certification and assessment, obviously we try to vet out like, hey, what steps have you taken thus far? Have you been self-attesting? What's your SPRS scores? Like, are you working with any MSPs, RPOs, anything like that? But at the end of the day, if they're saying like, I'm ready to be assessed, like, okay, we'll come in and assess you, right? The biggest differentiator that we've seen by far in organizations having issues with phase one or not is if they are working with an experienced MSP, RPO, somebody. I think it was last week, I spoke with a very rare client. I think it was a client of Summit 7's actually. So not only does that, provide the warm fuzzies, like, okay, we know Summit 7 does pretty good work. Like they're, probably going to be in a pretty good place. The guy I was talking to was a lead CCA internally staffed on their organization. Yeah.
That's great.
I was like, this is the most green lights I could see with a client. You're a lead CCA. You're asking very good detailed questions. You're answering all my questions really well. And I know Summit 7 is your MSP. So there's some things that we can sort of suss out early on to get a really good sense of like, okay, do you have any expertise, whether it's internal with a lead CCA and or are you utilizing an outside firm to help you that is an expert in the space as well? Having said that, I would say it might be difficult to get hard numbers on false starts because it could even be in an initial kickoff call conversationally around, hey, is your SSP ready? No, we're going to need that for actually like we need a few more months on that. Do you deem that a false start? Do you not? I mean, probably not. But I think there's a lot of different gray areas in that are preceding us handing in a formal, here's a pre-assessment report to EMS, right? So I would say that's probably the biggest issue with getting specific numbers on it. But like I said, we have seen, in that, hey, kickoff call to handing off our pre-assessment form on how the pre-assessment went to DoD, all sorts of varying levels of like not ready or pretty good. So to the question, what are some of the biggest issues that we see with phase one? I'll start by kind of clarifying again, like what do we look for in phase one? And that might help us kind of suss out what some of the issues are. So you kind of spoke on this. Really, primarily, we're looking at a lot of the documentation. So your system security plan obviously is going to be very critical and key to that. And as I just mentioned, one of the big things I hear a lot is like in the sales conversations or getting under contracts, a lot of times organizations are understanding the bottleneck and the backlog, and they're wanting to pick a C3PAO, get under contract, and get on our schedule as soon as possible. Well, the flip side of that is oftentimes they aren't quite ready when they contract with us, right? But they know, hey, in our plan, we plan to be ready by X date. So let's start then. So then if and when we want to say, hey, let's start phase one review, it's oftentimes just continuing to push off. Our documentation's not ready. Is it taking us longer than we thought? Whatever that might be. So that's a big general one that we see. But once we get to that point and they're ready to hand off that documentation, we review their system security plan and other documents, right? Like any diagramming that they have, boundary diagram, data flow diagrams, SRMs, any of that sort of stuff, all very helpful. The terms used in the CAP for phase one are completeness, accuracy, and consistency that we need to look for, which, again, a little bit subjective, but really, again, from years of doing these assessments, you mentioned FedRAMP. We've had a pre-assessment review process with our FedRAMP processes for years. So we're very familiar with, okay, from reading some of this documentation, these policies, procedures, like, do we feel like they are directionally ready or not? Right. That is, I would say, the biggest thing is like, we just have to get really the warm and fuzzies, their subjective terms, completeness, accuracy, consistency. We just have to get the warm and fuzzies from putting together all the different puzzle pieces of all the documentation that they give us. Does this fit a neat, cohesive story of overall compliance and taking this seriously and knowing what you need to do to prove your compliance, right?
Yep.
Because some of the other things we need to do is we need to have confidence, that word's used in the CAP as well, confidence that you have availability of evidence to submit to us for us to review and available personnel to be interviewed, right? So all of this is really like, are we getting confidence that you're ready for this?
It's like Scott and June are on vacation and you got to talk to them. It's like, oh, when they're going to be back? Well, they're European. So, they're taking 2 months off. So
yeah. I am dealing with that right now. Every year we take a month off. So some of the issues that we see, again, just general documentation stuff aside, like I mentioned right there, when we look at external service providers, just some very basic questions around what external service providers are you using? What is your relationship? What is their involvement in your CUI boundary and your CMMC compliance can start to raise some red flags very quickly in terms of the client or the OSC not properly understanding, maybe it's an MSP relationship, like who's responsible for what. Do they have a shared responsibility matrix? Kind of feeds into something you were talking about earlier with MSPs. We've at a scary rate seen that be pretty hit or miss as well. Like, okay, an OSC is talking about an MSP. Oh, well, the MSP is handling that. Okay, cool. What's their customer responsibility matrix? Like, they're not handling it, right? What's the relationship here? And then they're like, oh, I don't know. Let me try to get that. And then that delays things. And then maybe they don't have one. So there's all sorts of things. And then the FedRAMP of it all, right? So very early on, any cloud services, obviously, we're asking that FedRAMP question, and it still surprises me quite a bit, but people just aren't aware of that as much as you think.
They really aren't. I talked to some very large companies, thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of employees. And the first question I ask is like, oh yeah, we're in Microsoft Commercial. I'm like, oh, okay. You know, that doesn't have FedRAMP authorization. Like you'll find this interesting. And this is also a problem. I talked to a company in Europe. Their parent company was in Europe.
Yeah.
Well, they don't have access to some of these FedRAMPed environments anymore since Microsoft stripped off commercial. I was talking to legal counsel, one of them that just passed the DIBCAC assessment, flying colors, crushed it. And I was like, yeah, too bad you're not going to be able to pass CMMC. And they're like, what do you mean? They're like, oh, well, like there's a FedRAMP requirement for the cloud provider that you had in scope through DIBCAC. Like, oh, DIBCAC didn't tell us that was not FedRAMP anymore. And they had their DIBCAC assessment a month before Microsoft stripped off the FedRAMP on the commercial cloud. And so it was like, oh no, it's like this false, feeling of like, oh, if we pass the DIBCAC high, we're crushing it. We're like CMMC ready to go. And it's like,
I could understand.
Keep those things up to date. Like people can remove FedRAMP authorization. Like they can fall out, I'll call it a FedRAMP.
100%.
Especially on the equivalency side, right?
I mean, even more so equivalency. Equivalency can be problematic even because, and again, I mentioned 20X. I'll just briefly mention like maybe what that is because working with like on the 3PAO side for FedRAMP, a ton of questions around FedRAMP 20X right now. So for anybody that may have heard of that, the long and short of it is, so FedRAMP traditionally has had their authorization pathway to get an ATO and to get FedRAMP authorized through obtaining, there was JAB, Joint Authorization Board, which is no longer there anymore, or an agency sponsor. Basically, a federal agency agrees to authorize you through the process, and then the FedRAMP PMO gets involved after that to review and affirm the authorization and to get you listed on the FedRAMP authorization or the FedRAMP marketplace. And the whole intent of that was to get away from these one-to-one assessments. Oh, I'm an agency. I have to make an individual risk assessment on your status here to compliance to 853 controls that I decide, the moderate baseline, for instance. So FedRAMP was, let's authorize once and use many, right? So we're going to get you FedRAMP authorized, and then people can still access that package, but they know that they're FedRAMP authorized. New FedRAMP director, Pete Waterman, completely rethinking the way that we do FedRAMP right now. Looking at a lot of what the problems had been in the past around, lengthy, clunky, high requirements, the bureaucraticness of it all, especially with agency sponsorship. Acquiring an agency sponsor, far and away the biggest issues that clients see. Like I would get so many clients coming to me and be like, hey, I want to get FedRAMP authorized. Okay, why? What's driving this? We just want to sell to the federal government. Cool. That's going to be very hard, right?
Yeah.
That's the chicken or the egg of it all. Is like you need this to sell to the government, but you also need that relationship to get authorized because you need a sponsorship to get authorized. So
by the way, we've seen people basically have to deploy like an IL5 self-hosted environment for the government as like a proof of concept, validating that they're actually use the service before any level of sponsorship would be approved. And so it's like, oh, you have to first get a contract to do a private deployment in the gov cloud of the actual DoD, DISA, Army, Navy, whoever you're doing it with.
Yeah.
And then maybe do that for 2 years. And then they're like, we love this so much, but we just want it as a SaaS service. Like, we'll do FedRAMP with you,
Yeah.
Anyways, very interesting.
High bar to get a sponsor. So anyway, 20X is like reimagining all of that. They're looking to provide a pathway that does not require an agency sponsorship. They're looking to go away from security controls even to these things called key security indicators, KSIs. So it's in a pilot program phase right now. So the long and short of it is, if anybody, especially as it pertains to CMMC, here's anything about FedRAMP 20X, there is nothing around 20X sufficing or meeting any of the FedRAMP requirements for CMMC. You can't even get authorized at moderate through 20X currently. So that alone kind of shows you. But
I think they only have the low impact, right? The LI, I think, is the only one I've seen. Yeah.
So right now, the pilot program that ends in 11 days actually is you can submit to get authorized at low. But even then, if you go look at the marketplace, there's some of them on there now. It says 20X low. It's not just, hey, you're authorized at low.
Interesting.
Because it's a completely different process. You're going against key security indicators and not these controls. So there's still a lot of questions as to like, well, what are the ramifications of that? Do agencies view that the same as a traditional? They definitely won't, but to what degree? So there's a lot to figure out there.
Very interesting.
Anyway, a little tangent, 20X tangent.
I love it. Dude, I'm here for it. This stuff's fascinating to me. It's just, You just wake up thinking about it sometimes. You're like, have they thought about this? It's like, well, DFAR 7012 and CMMC doesn't say better at moderate 20XX. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like that's a little bonus. So,
well, me and Pete internally here, we were like, let's go back and look at that DoD memo around equivalency, and it calls out like the recent security control requirements, and it's like, well, 20X isn't even around security controls; they're around these KSI things. So, anyway.
RS, thanks for joining us. Hitting a lot of obstacles I've encountered. Glad I joined. Happy you're here with us. If you have any questions, feel free to jump in here. Let me look at the chat here. Scott Singer, another fun C3PAO and friend of the show. EMAS won't accept a failure, so this stat's very hard for the false start stat, if you will.
Right, exactly.
We've had a lot. We've had many and pushed the mock assessments very hard. Yes, we're in with you as well here. Nicholas, how much does the C3PAO assessment look at internal CMMC level 2 audits done by the OSC? So I'm assuming that this question would be like basically based on the gap assessment information that you've done internally of your environment is how I would read that. Matt, you reading that similarly?
Yeah, I was curious. I could interpret it a few ways. I'm wondering if the question is like how much do you look at that in like a sales process in terms of, hey, how, what have we done? But I'm assuming it's more in the latter. In the actual assessment, are we looking at self-attestations and or external gaps? I'm not sure which way, but again, I always like, you can certainly reach a limit here, but the more documentation, the better. The more you can show to prove us that you are compliant, the better. But there's nothing in there as far as a requirement to prove, hey, previous self-attestations were being done, previous external audits were being done. Obviously, that's not a requirement because it hadn't been a requirement. So there's nothing hard and fast in there that we have to check in terms of, hey, show us that you had been doing this CMMC level 2 internal audit.
All right, let's see here. I think I had another one pop up here.
Oh, while you're looking for that, I think Nicholas just kind of clarified. We do annual audits versus the 320. Does the C3PAO care about those results? I mean, care, sure. Does it change how we're going to assess and validate those 320? Probably not, right?
Yeah. The good news is if you have that, you should already have all the evidence to justify your position to an assessor. An assessor is coming in blind, and they're going to basically start from scratch, if you will, top down. They're not going to take any existing assessments as gospel until they themselves have laid eyes on the results and the met or unmet status of those controls and validated that themselves, for sure. Let's see here.
Yeah, exactly. But I would say, again, Nick, to the earlier point, or Nicholas, giving us confidence that you're ready to go through phase 1. Sure. Yeah, that probably gives us confidence that you're, to Daniel's point, you've already thought about the 320. You probably already have, evidence and artifacts mapped to each of those. So,
Dark green. When you wake up thinking about federal and moderate,
time for vacation, Daniel.
Matt, let's go on a vacation. I'm not the only one that thinks this way. I think you're in that boat too. So we all need to head out on a beach or a lake somewhere here.
I woke up in night sweats last night. It was either the virus or that. I don't know.
Daniel always comes to the show with some fun questions. The 4-letter word that we all love, FIPS 140-2, encryption requirement question. Do I need to implement FIPS 140 for encryption at rest if the resting place is within the CUI boundary? So 2 answers to that. There's 2 ways to protect the confidentiality of CUI. Way number 1 is FIPS 140-2 validated cryptography, which Matt, you and I did a show, an episode on my podcast, that CMMC show, where you're also even looking at FIPS 140-3 because -2 is actually getting rarer and rarer to see on appliances, even though the hard code requirement is in Rev 2 is 140-2. But going back to your question, Daniel, you can either do physical protections around that CUI, or you have to use FIPS validated cryptography around encrypting that data. So if you can show the case of you're using physical controls to protect the CUI or encryption using FIPS to do it, then you're going to be in the clear. So my only question back to you would be, if the data is within the CUI boundary and it's using one of those 2 means, then you're going to be good. Always fun. Was Matt, any commentary on that, or thumbs up across the boards?
Concur. Daniel's the man.
Concur. All right, our new watcher here, RS. I've been approached by many a commercial company that don't know if they want to make the investment. They haven't won the contract, but there's a DFARS requirement to work. high-level business case. That's a character limit, hence short question. Curious if you contract vehicle to cover some costs to reach compliance. So what we are seeing, and this is why it's really important, and honestly, the timing of CMMC, I wish it would have been in September, and I'll explain why. I wish 48 CFR would be published in a final state in September so people can still work on adjusting their rates for the new government's, the new federal government's contract or fiscal year, right? Because a lot of people, if it gets published in October, they're going to keep the same rate card with mild operational adjustments without actually taking account for CMMC. So their rate card is going to be lower than what it actually needs to be to do CMMC if they haven't started yet already, which a lot of people haven't even started on that journey, as we know. People have been using the DFAR 7012 clause flow down and pushing back on that to primes saying, hey, number one, do I need it? Okay, if I need it, now can you tell me if I'm going to have CUI or not? Okay, I am or I'm not. And then using that to maybe on a one-off adjust rates or the cost of the project. Or sometimes, I haven't seen this done a lot, sometimes people will take the solicitation to a bank to try and get a loan to say, hey, I'm going to pursue this work. It's a new branch of the business that we're doing. We're getting into a Fed defense practice. I need funding to meet this requirement. Will you give us a loan? So there's a couple of different things there. But once DFAR 7021 comes out, which is going to be the CMMC clause itself, contractually stating, are you going to have to be level 1, level 2 self-attest, level 2 certified, or level 3 on each contract, and then prior to that, each solicitation they send out, it's almost going to be a little bit too late by that point, just because of the timeline it takes you to get compliant. You might miss on those first few contracts until you actually get funding approved or get dollars in the bank and justified, get compliant, which can take anywhere from 3, 6, 12, 18, 24 months, again, all kind of depending on size and scope. So yeah, I hope that was kind of helpful. Ooh, I like that. So I'm assuming that was the right answer.
Assuming it was helpful. So Daniel, what you're saying is, and I can't remember who I'm quoting. I just remember it was like some very famous, very smart person. You can be early for CMMC, or you can be late, but you can't be right on time. Is that what it was?
I think I'm gonna get that tattooed like right here on my shoulder, right? It's like you can be early, you can be late, but you can't be on time. And so many people are trying to thread the needle. They thought Doge was killing it. They thought Trump was killing it. They thought Biden would have killed it. They thought second gen Trump would have killed, and it's just gone through so many things that it's just like, guys, it's not going away. We had the SECDEF publish a memo with CMMC in it. The first time we've seen somebody at that level, basically say we're doing CMMC, right? It's always basically been the CIO's office, deputy CIO, making these claims and statements, whether it's in Congress or through memos and things like that. So
yeah, I continue to be surprised how many people are trying to time it just right. That's why I love that saying that you have, because it's like you can't nail the timing. You're going to fall on one end or the other. Yeah,
you can't. And this is why it's so important. You need to work out your rate cards for the new fiscal, assuming CMMC is going to happen.
Yeah,
you got to have to work that out, because you're going to be in a real big bind if you don't assume those additional operating costs. I mean, that could be hundreds of thousands of dollars of additional OpEx that you now have to account for somewhere. And then you just pray to God you have a commercial side of your business that's making enough to cover, right, at least in the first year, cover the cost of CMMC. And that's not usually a viable solution either. So, Daniel, back to you. So if I'm encrypting, the encryption must be FIPS 140-2 dark green. Firing back. I love the dialogue back and forth between people in chat. For encryption at rest, if not protected by alternative physical controls, FIPS is needed. That's correct. Yeah. So either encrypt it to FIPS digitally or physically protect it. One of the two as part of that as well. So if you have a piece of paper in a building and the building is a CUI asset because you have all the physical protection controls, you can leave that piece of paper on your desk, assuming everyone's authorized and the building is compliant and all of those things, right? So that's just kind of another example there. So, all right, let's get back to some of yours here that I had. Oh, cool. This is a good one. I've heard interesting stories on this. How long do assessments actually take? I've heard of an assessment taking only 4 hours.
Oh,
but
wow.
the scope, the actual like real, not the pre-work, right? But the actual like real assessment, because the boundary was like this big, right? I mean, it was like nothing.
Yeah.
Most of them I hear take 3 to 5 days of actual you conducting interviews with people kind of in real time. Is that feel about right?
Yeah, exactly. And this is why I wanted to talk about it is I think when people hear like, how long does the assessment take? Like they immediately think of that part. How long am I being audited? How long do I have auditors in my hair interviewing me, you know, yada, yada. And I want to speak to the larger assessment timeline, because sometimes when I mention, hey, from like us starting phase 1 to certification in hand, that's going to be longer. There's other processes involved. And so sometimes when they hear that, they're like, what the heck? I heard also it might take 3 days, 5 days. Why are you saying several weeks? So did want to clarify this. So I would say beginning to end. And again, there's all sorts of variables here. As I talked about before, a lot of times clients will be like, ooh, I don't have this documentation. We push that out 2 weeks. But assuming there's none of that, I say generally about 4 to 6 weeks from start to certification in hand. So that's including your phase 1 review. That's including that phase 2, which again, to clarify to Daniel's point, 3 to 5 days is like 95% of them are falling within that range for us of like how long phase 2 actually assessing you and your compliance to the 320 are happening. Phase 3, this kind of speaks to why that might lead into several weeks, is that's more of like the reporting. There's a QA process that we have to go through. In the CAP, it specifically calls out we have to wait 10 days until we do our outbrief meeting. So there are defined timelines in there that you can't really force your way out of. Like when the CAP calls out, you have to wait 10 days until we do our outbrief meeting, as an example. But anyway, we're doing our reporting QA process, waiting that 10 days, doing the outbrief meeting. And then phase 4, obviously, is ideally issuing your certification. There's obviously the huge caveat that if you get a conditional, then you get a 180-day POAM. But if you passed, you got the 110 out of 110. I tell clients, most of them are seeing 4 to 6 weeks. And then, yes, the actual assessment, phase 2, 3 to 5 days.
So that's really good to know. And during that assessment, so Matt Travis, Cyber Presidente, had actually come out a few times and said, hey, the CAP wasn't very clear about this.
Correct.
It's like, because the CAP basically says, I'm going to kind of paraphrase here, you have 10 days to, what some assessors are believing, right the ship of anything found in a not met control.
Yeah. So, and that's from the CAP, right? That's directly right the ship. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the CAP. Yeah. That's the hyper air quotes here. So some assessors are like, well, it doesn't explicitly say they can't fix problems that are found. And some assessors were allowing companies during a 10-day window to fix not met controls and make them met. He spoke at CS2. I think he's now spoken at CS5, which is the new thing of CS2. Make sure to go to those conferences. They're going to be fantastic. And he basically said, hey, guys, and he said it on the town hall as well, hey, the 10-day window is not for you to generate new evidence or artifacts. It's not for you to fix problems. It's like if you needed a new signature on a piece of paper because that person left the company, something like that, right? Can you speak a little bit to that and kind of the confusion in the industry and just kind of set the record straight? If you find something not met on me, can I fix it with net new configuration or net new documentation during the assessment?
I love that you make it sound like it's like on you. Like I find it in your pocket. Yeah, that's a not met. That's a not met.
That's right.
So I think you outlined it really well, especially in the beginning. People reading the CAP, I would say us included, we're like, well, it doesn't say they can't remediate during that time, right? And so I think it was a little bit more of the wild, wild west out the gate in terms of what are we allowing within that window. Then I think Matt Travis and the Cyber AB caught wind of the fact that that was generally how C3POs were approaching it. And they said, hey, whoa. That was not our intent at all. We apologize that that wasn't clear. We have intentions to clarify that in the next version of the CAP. But until then, here is, so that you guys are aware, I'm telling you, here is our interpretation of that. And here is our intent with that. And it is, as you outlined, it is, I believe it says you can submit additional evidence is what the verbiage says, right? And so the intent is more so something like you uploaded an older version of a policy and procedure, but you have the updated version. You just uploaded the wrong one and we had to mark it as not met because it didn't meet your requirements. You go, oh, that's my bad. I actually have the new version here. I uploaded the wrong one. okay, cool. Yeah, this policy does clarify that is not met, not met. It is now met. So it is for things like that. And I think some of it is sort of inherent. It's 10 days by the end of phase 2. That's what Matt was saying, is like, you know, it's kind of implied that you can't remediate a lot within a 10-day window, certainly nothing major. So that kind of shows that the intent is less so, hey, fix things in these 10 days, and more so submit additional evidence that was already there. You're not creating new evidence or creating new policies, but like if you had it and you didn't upload it, you couldn't get a signature, a person was out of town, whatever it was. That's more the intent, which again, I think speaks back to, don't try to skip phase 1. That's the importance of phase 1. We want to catch those things in phase 1 so that in phase 2, we don't even run into that issue.
Awesome. Yeah, that was a slippery one for a while. I was very interested to hear that commentary on the town hall and then at the conferences too. It's just very interesting to see what literally one word excluded from a sentence can actually kind of the ramifications of what that looks like, right?
I remember at CS2, I was on the C3PO panel, and we all, you know, it's Fernando, myself, and we all like basically said the same thing at that time. And Matt was in the audience, and then he was kind of like, hey, I got a question here at the end of the panel. That's not what we meant.
Right.
And then
by the way,
then I think that was one of the big points that made him aware of it. Then from there, he was like, okay, I need to, in my weekly C3PO calls, clarify to them, and then in the town halls, clarify there as well.
All right, here's an interesting one. Do I need a cage code to get CMMC L2 certified? So we'll divorce the two for just a second. You can get a certification, upload to EMAS of those results. So you could probably, if you wanted to, get certified without the upload piece to EMAS. I would have to imagine. I don't know anyone who would want to do that.
Sure,
because EMAS is what the DoD will look at, right? We've heard commercial companies come to us and say, "There's no assessing body for NIST. This is the closest that we got. We want our commercial environment assessed against CMMC L2 from a controls perspective."
I see.
Anyways, just kind of interesting.
I wonder if I've never run into that. I wonder if we could actually grant the certification in that case, though, because we could certainly do an assessment against the 110 and the 320 in the same process, but I don't know that that would be a CMMC certification if we're not having a cage code and uploading to EMAS, because the certification has that information on there, right?
Yeah, the cap says you got to do these things, right? And it has those references in the actual cert, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see commercial certs in CMMC, if those are even possible or not. Because we run into people that are like, it's a good framework from a confidentiality perspective, right? It's not necessarily the full CIA triangle or Illuminati little cybersecurity shout out there.
Yeah.
So yeah, anyways, that was just kind of interesting. But back to the actual question. But do I actually need a cage code to get certified?
But yes, you do, right? You do. Okay. So that's a requirement into the upload, and then that information, is part of the certification itself. So yeah, a lot of clients I'm talking to are like, okay, but what if I don't? I'm like, it's not too hard to get one. Like, just go to GSA and acquire a cage code, because that is needed.
Yep. Scott chimes in, can't issue a cert without cage code today. It'd be interesting to see if they lessen those constraints up at all in any way for commercial assessments to take place against the NIST framework. I know that's not the intent, obviously, of the program, but it is kind of an interesting, secondary market, I'll call it, when it comes to stuff like this.
That is interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I'm surprised I hadn't heard that. I feel like I hear everything on sales calls, but you heard something I haven't. I love it.
Oh yeah. People are like, hey, we want to get certified for our own commercial environment. Not defense related, right? But just, it's a good framework. It shows their insurance company that they have a cybersecurity cert, right? It shows validation to their, non-defense work. Hey, we're certified in cybersecurity to some degree, right? So we're going to end on this question with a whopping 60 seconds left. We might have to go a couple minutes over. We might have to go a couple minutes over. Which controls do organizations seeking certifications struggle with? Give me maybe top 3.
Okay, so I have these written out here. I try to stay up to date with all of our CCAs or lead CCAs. I'm like, hey, what are we seeing? And so this was, as of last week, kind of a consensus of what we're seeing lately. And I have a few of them listed out here, and we can maybe just rip through a few of them. So 3.5.2, C specifically, Assessment Objective C. When using FedRAMP moderate CSPs as a CUI enclave, companies often configure separate accounts for that enclave with MFA. Without single sign-on, VPN, or ZTNA in place, device authentication becomes difficult. So again, this goes back to, I don't know, this is a larger topic as well, I would say, beyond this control, configuration. Configuration. Like people just think because, oh, okay, well, I'm using whatever it is, FedRAMP moderate CSP in this case, I'm set. Or if it's like an MSP or, you know, whatever it is, people don't often think about like configuring properly, and they don't often document that they're configuring properly. And so they just kind of think like, oh, I know that this covers it, so I'm good. We're going to dig into the configuration of the accounts, right?
So make sure to provide evidence for the second account on how you're enforcing multi-factor for privileged access or access to the privileged environment. Yes,
exactly. Let's see. I've got a handful here, but if we're just going to shout out a few, maybe I'll jump to this one. 3.1.4, lack of separation of duties matrices. Yeah. I kind of asked the assessor that brought this one up a little bit more detail, and it's kind of a fun story, but like it just, some of these things just really surprised me. They kind of feel like, okay, well, you would think that, you know, separation of duties, like it's clearly called out, like let's see how that works. I think this just speaks to, again, the documentation thing of like people just not understanding, like your assessor doesn't know you, your boundary, your situation. Your documentation is what communicates that to them. So look at like a separation of duties matrices with this control specifically, and look at how that can just easily spell out for your assessor. Here's our separation of duties, you know, by person and by duty and all that sort of stuff. And oftentimes these things that are just blatantly called out in the assessment objectives as like, hey, identify XYZ, there's just no XYZ. And it's like, hey, guys, it's specifically called out to identify it. And the other thing that's interesting, maybe I'll end on this because this is kind of a broader thing that kind of speaks to this as well, is like the waterfall effect of assessment objectives, right? Oftentimes, if you look at the A, it is something like identify, right? So identify, that leads you to think documentation, right? You're identifying in a piece of documentation. Then when you look at like B, C, D, often cases, then they don't. Exactly. They don't say things like identify again. It's enforce or whatever it is. And it's like, okay, well, if you're not looking at A, we can't look at how you're enforcing it, right? So that's another thing that I would maybe warn some OSCs that might be listening to think through, is like really drill down on those assessment objectives and really think about the waterfall nature of, if you're not hitting that top one, the others are just kind of NA or not met by kind of default at that point.
Very interesting. Start with identify. If you can't define it, what are you doing?
What are you doing? What are you doing? I mean, it's like, it seems like a basic thing, but like, it's very surprising how often we're seeing it. It's worth calling out. Well, thanks everyone for joining today. Matt, thanks as always. I'm sure we'll have you on again. Jacob, we hope you're enjoying your time off today, my friend. If you have any questions, make sure to definitely call the number for CUI hotline. We have a CUI hotline form if you want to be anonymous. Secure the Dib is coming up, which is our huge free webinar conference day event. Make sure to join that. I think that's happening in just a few weeks, actually. So Dustin will probably drop the link here in chat. And yeah, everyone have a great weekend, and we'll see you again next Friday. Thank you all so much. Great to be here, Daniel. Thank you, guys.